Last week I talked about starting a course this week and helping people to record these types of conversations, which I think, especially after the passing of my mother, my sister, a whole bunch of other people, I think they're really important that we have these kinds of conversations and preserve people's voices. And now we have the technology to do it. A lot of people said, Stuart, we don't want to do it. We want you to do it for us. Several people told me that. So if you'd like me, I've already got my first several clients for doing that, for whether it's audio, video, both, going face-to-face and talking to people to kind of collect their stories in their own voices face-to-face, which now that we're vaccinated and have safety we can do. If you're interested in that, we're putting a new page on manlistening.com. And it'll tell you how to get in touch with me and engage my services. So I hope I can help. Thanks.
What can we all create from our minds and our hands to save ourselves?
What is the sound of one man listening? This is Man Listening, a fresh podcast featuring the stories of strong women who bounce back. Man Listening. Because every woman deserves to be heard.
Hi there, and welcome to Man Listening. I'm Stuart Watson. Yvonne Simons and I met at WRAL in Raleigh, and she has since bounced around the country, Las Vegas, Sacramento, a bunch of other places, Ohio, and now she's the news director at KATU, KATU TV in Portland, Oregon. And boy, has Portland, Oregon had the news in the last year. And for a Black woman to be the news director in the middle of all of that is quite something. And her story and how she arrived there is quite something. And so now my friend, a woman that I hugely respect, Yvonne Simons.
Where were you born?
I was born in this little town in Michigan called Ypsilanti, which isn't so little anymore. And growing up, my dad used to call it Ipsy-Tucky because a lot of the car plants were in Ypsilanti and Detroit. When they converted them to war plants, a lot of people from Kentucky and Tennessee came to our area. So I grew up in the town next door called Belleville, and there are I grew up with tons of kids who had strong Southern accents.
And where are your people from? How many generations in Michigan?
Oh, golly. My mom's parents were they're kind of from this Ypsilanti. Belleville is downriver from urban Detroit by about 40 minutes. And my mom's folks kind of grew up there and in Kalamazoo. And my dad's parents were from the Canton area, which is suburban, but my mom and dad are fourth cousins. And if you go back, they're from Ontario, Canada, because as I was told as a child, my great aunt Mahalda came up to the Underground Railroad to Ontario. And they told us that she married an Iroquois Indian, but probably more likely she was raped. And I learned that story when I was much older, but that there's this line. So this semi-straight hair that runs through my family is probably Iroquois. And my mom used to say when I was younger that my temper was from Iroquois. But it's an interesting story. And I knew about Mahalda from when I was a child and felt this affinity to stories about the Underground Railroad. And mom has tried through Ancestry.com and some other family history to trace where she came from, Mahalda. The closest we've been able to figure it out is from a part of Eastern North Carolina. It isn't that funny because I ended up living in North Carolina for a while. But I didn't know that connection when I was living there until just before I was leaving. My family wanted me to go research, but I tried to explain to them that part of North Carolina from Raleigh was like 3 hours away. I didn't do it. But, I'd like to retire in North Carolina one day, and I may go back and do it because it's interesting.
Have you done any DNA? Has anybody done?
No, we should. I did a missionary trip once to the Bahamas, which sounds funny, but we were in the outer islands working with some churches. And when I landed in Nassau and I looked around, every Black person looked like me. So I think wherever Bahamians came from, and I think it's West Africa, I think that's where we're from.
Well, I just looked like you. What do you mean?
Feature-wise, I could look like I was Bahamian. I looked like I was at a family reunion. I wrote my mom a postcard and sent it, and I found it when I was moving her recently, and I was just going like, Mom, we're Bahamian. Everyone looks like us. It was striking. And I just kind of thought, I grew up I say it's suburban Detroit, and technically it is, but the home I grew up in on Van Born Road in Belleville, Michigan, which really was Van Buren Township, was country, rural. I grew up around farmer kids and white farmer kids. There weren't a lot of Black people where we strictly lived. Now, if we had lived 1 mile to the west, I would have been in a different school system where there are a lot more Black people. It was just interesting. So when I went to elementary school, there was my family, and there was the Harris family, who was Black, and there was Ricky Belleville's family, who are Filipino, and then there was Bambi Kumar, and her family was Indian. And as far as I remember, that was it for the first 6 years of my education. I was around white people and very probably assimilated to that. And so when I went to junior high school, the junior high encompassed another part of our district where kids were from West Willow. And that was a largely Black community. At least I had a strong Black. So suddenly my school was about 10% African-American, and we couldn't figure each other out. They wanted to fight me all the time.
What do you mean by couldn't? Why would they want to fight you?
It's just, it's that weird thing about junior high school and fitting in. I wasn't Black enough for them. And so a lot of my junior high, when I look back and think about it, I was just terrorized because they would literally, one day they really kind of forced me out of the lunch line, and I tried to move away, and they just said they were going to beat me up.
I wasn't Black enough for them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that appearance? What does that mean? I don't know what that means.
It's hard to, it's a common phenomenon for, I hear this story, it's not just my story, that for high achieving Black students who are in high white environments, a lot of times other Black students accuse them of acting white, as if achieving an education was a white thing. And if you're doing that, then you're just trying to act white. You're trying to get out of it. They say, you're just trying to get out of it. I'm going, whereas, the message I'm getting from home is you're going to school and you're not messing around. You're there to get an education. So, do it. And so it was very hard to understand. I was, they just thought, and I also had the worst taste in clothes and the worst taste in music. I was not assimilated fully into what one would think of a kid growing up in the 60s and 70s, a stone's throw away from downtown Detroit and Motown. I did know that music, but I'm so embarrassed. I had Monkees albums, and I had this recording that should probably embarrass Sally Field. She did a recording of songs by the Flying Nun. And when I was in grade school, I loved that album. I could probably still sing it for you today. And so even my own siblings were just,
one. I gotta. You've set me up. I want to hear one.
Who needs wings to fly? Certainly not I.
Okay, no more. Otherwise, I'm gonna get sued for copyright infringement. But I think that's probably a better version.
She was okay. A lot of it was really cute. I had terrible taste in music. I would buy albums for my siblings for Christmas, and they'd be terrified of what I was going to buy them. And so I was a unicorn a little bit, and I didn't want to get beat up. My sister did get in a fight, probably for some similar reasons, but the outcome was so different because, she got in huge trouble and the principal called and my parents had to go down there and all that stuff, telling her story. But she ended up really becoming friends with those girls, where by high school, I just feel like most of the Black students that I had grown up with in junior high school and who were around just ignored me. I was a non-factor, and it didn't bother me all that much because I was having a lot of fun in high school, doing theater and music, and I was college prep kids. I did really, really well in school until prom, and no one asked me. And then, it's those moments where you go, well, maybe I should have done something different. I don't know, and it's weird because you want to be yourself, your true self, but what does that get you? This is a recurring theme in my life. I'll sit back and go, I didn't mean to do this. Should I have done something differently? I don't know. I had a pastor friend that told me once, you do what God intends for you to do. And why do you waste time second guessing the past? It's good advice. I have trouble actually living in the present. That's active energy to stay, not thinking, worrying about the future, and not wondering about the past. But I still do it. I went to Eastern Michigan University.
Why?
Why? Because I won a scholarship. My parents had already told me that college was not a thing unless I figured out how to pay for it, because they didn't have it. We grew up pretty poor. Didn't know it, but we were. So in my senior year, I enrolled in the Junior Miss pageant because winning at the local level got you a huge scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. And so I saw my friends do it in my junior year of their senior year, and I just studied it. And I went home that night and started planning my win.
What was your talent?
I sang a Judy Garland song called Dear Mr. Gable. I won by cities Junior Miss, and I won the regional Junior Miss, and I went to the state pageant and was a rousing 5th place, but I won another scholarship. And so and then I won a state of Michigan academic scholarship. So basically I went through most of my undergraduate degree paid for. I did just come up with, living at my campus living expenses. And I did work. I worked about 30 hours a week at JCPenney.
JCPenney, doing what?
Register and, keeping the children's department kind of organized. And I did that for the entire time I was in school, in undergraduate school. And it was, they're good with students. I thought JCPenney was good about recognizing that they were fostering people's futures. And so sometimes if I had a big exam, they'd let me go home if I was worried about it.
If I asked Yvonne, age 18, what are you going to be when you grow up? What would she have said?
I would have been a singer on Broadway. I wish I had tried it. I just got, I went to music school. I was like one of the top students in my high school, and I got into Eastern Michigan's vocal music education program. It's a double major in education and music. And then I learned I wasn't very good, which was terrible. I wasn't very good. I actually had to deconstruct my voice. I had learned some hugely problematic ways of singing that would have wrecked my voice had
What problem?
I was using my throat to support the vocal production, which is how people get nodes and have very serious vocal problems. And I had in my first voice lesson on campus, I'm singing my song so the teacher can get an orientation to who I was. And she stopped me in the middle of it and said, "Oh, honey, is there anything else you can do?"
Oh my God. And how did you receive that?
Well, I'd never heard of her before, so I was kind of like
Dismissive.
Well, but halfway into the semester, I just, now I'm hearing all these other students in my studio and in our department, and I'm realizing I got a heck of a lot of work to do, but I didn't know what else to do. And I loved music, and I do to this day, and I just hate being told no. I just hate being told no. And I thought, well, they let me in here, so there must be something besides. I didn't think of this at the time, but it might have been a racial quota, but whatever. I hate being told no. So I just dug in. And luckily, my voice teacher, Veronica August, she's a technician. So she spent with me the next 2 years deconstructing my voice. And by my sophomore year, I was starting to think maybe there is something else I should be doing, because I felt like I sounded so terrible. And it was behind my peers, and I'm thinking, what can I do? But it wasn't in vocal performance. I was in music ed. So I was also in the classroom doing practicums and stuff and thinking, well, I could, be good at this. And I was singing in a madrigal group on campus, and that was a lot of fun. And I got a lot of confidence there. And I would go home in summer break and do recitals at home. And my junior year, it all started to come back together. My voice started to grow and started to sound pretty, and I was working on some literature that was interesting, and it was fun. And when I did my senior recital, I remember warming up in the big music hall, because if they hated you, they didn't approve you to be in there. You had to do it in Alexander Music Building, but I was in Pease Auditorium. And my teacher was walking down the aisle, and she goes, "You're gonna sing everything? I mean, you need to save something for the performance." And I went, "Yes, I know." And she said, if somebody had told me 4 years ago that you would be approved and you'd be singing a very nice recital here in Pease Auditorium, I would have liquidated my assets and bet against you.
That must have been rich.
And I just it felt good. And now I have a recording of that recital that I don't listen to anymore because the French is just so appallingly bad. It's good. And really, it was quite an achievement. The voice came a long way, but I don't sound like that anymore. I actually kept working on my voice. And I started teaching school in Georgia.
Where?
I started in Washington County, Georgia.
Oh my God.
The town of Washington, it was called, what was the county? Wilkes County, Washington, Georgia, tiny town. They believe
what part of the state is that?
Georgia. It's east of Athens, about halfway to Augusta, in the middle of nowhere. There were no apartments. If I wanted to live in Washington, I probably would have had to rent a mobile home, which I didn't want to do. And so I carpooled with 3 other teachers, and we lived in Athens, and we drove an hour every day to work and a carpool. We drove 1 week a month each. and you just had to steal through it if it was your week, but then the other 3 weeks you could sleep on the way to work. And it was this tiny town with, I think, the most amazing high school. Those kids, I looked at test scores, and these kids should be not great achieving kids, but that school was remarkable for where they could bring their students along.
Why? Who made a difference there?
God, it was the county school. It was predominantly Black because the white parents fled to the private schools, right? It was like stepping back into 1960, going there. Peculiar place, but they just believed in public education, and they also believed that not every, the prevailing wisdom that was coming at the time is every kid had to be made college ready. But I don't think that the school system believed that. Vocational wing of that school was amazing.
So what got you out of teaching schools? Why aren't you a career educator?
I left the Washington Wilkes was paying me on a third year of a 3-year grant that didn't get renewed. And I ended up going to Jackson County High School. They paid me $1,000 more a year. So it's now making a whopping 12 grand. So I thought, okay, and it was closer. I only had a 25-minute commute.
So you went from all Black school to all white school.
It was mixed, but probably predominantly white. There was a kid named Sammy, tall kid, likable kid, basketball star, and he couldn't read. And he was in my sophomore English class. I was teaching English. I was teaching everything in that school. It's crazy. And I thought, okay, well, they keep talking to him about getting basketball scholarships when he'd never pass the ACT because he can't read. So let's get him some services. And it's not a just flip the switch and he's in. There's a lot of paperwork, and you talk to parents, you got to get him. And they were all on board. And when I submitted the stuff, my principal said, "Are you crazy? We're never going to teach Sammy how to read. Why are you wasting our time?" Stood back and looked at how much time we spent on stuff that doesn't have anything to do with educating kids. And so then I started going, so what do I do now? And I was going to this little Assemblies of God church in Athens. And a friend of mine got married, that was getting married, but in Virginia Beach, asked me to sing in their wedding. And I went to Virginia Beach. This is all in that third year. They got me tickets to go see the 700 Club. And I went with some friends who are also there for the wedding. And they were talking about this CBN University, and that it had a communication school and an education school, and there was another department, and to raise up people to be guided by their faith into profession. And I came back after the wedding, and I kept talking about it. Gee, I wonder what that would be like, and da da da. It seems very small though. That could be chancy, and da da da. And finally, friends go, "Why don't you just stop yakking about it and get some information and find out what it's about? You keep talking about it." And I went, "Oh." And so I did, but I was afraid of taking the GRE. I have imposter syndrome, and that I keep thinking that somebody's going to figure out that I really never know what I'm doing. And I thought, I'm going to take this test and fail it mightily, because I didn't have to work all that hard except for the vocal program at Eastern. The academic stuff was just like, whatever. And so Georgia put a hold on, I couldn't take any more classes until I took the GRE. And I said, I have a 4.0. Yeah, got to take the GRE. Another one of those education things that doesn't make sense. And then here's the CBN University information, and you got to take the GRE. Oh, God. And I'm thinking, well, nope. And I just stopped. I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I got a phone call from a recruiter at CBN University. His name is Terrell Todd. And he said, we're going to be in Atlanta and you should come out and take a look. And so it was a Sunday afternoon, and I drove to Atlanta and I listened to their whole thing. And I just felt like I was probably supposed to go there, but I just went, hey, I've been a teacher for the last 3 years. I have no money. And he said, well, you know, if you score in the 35 percentile or higher, we give you tuition scholarships. Get a score 35% or higher on the GRE. And I went, but their deadline was in like a month. And I said, oh, yeah, well, I don't know about the GRE. And he goes, there's a GRE test on Saturday.
Oh my God.
6 days.
He called it bluff.
In Athens, where I lived. And, you know, I'm driving home from Atlanta going, I just feel like the big finger of God was going, do I have to make this any plainer to you? And so I got the registration form. I barely knew how to take the GRE. I read through the thing. I didn't take a practice test. I just kind of read through it as soon as I could. I was still teaching. And on Saturday morning, I walked in and I took this test. I don't remember anything about the test, nothing at all. And went, oh, well, you know, if I'm supposed to go there, it'll work out. And whatever weeks later that I got my results, I scored in the 34th percentile. And I got a 75% tuition grant from, and I went, I guess I'm going to CBN University. And I thought in the ed school, but I wanted to learn how to use television in the classroom, because while my students, you could work on sentence structure and get them doing that. And then when you go to writing paragraphs, they forgot how to write sentences and you'd start all over. And it was just this constant frustration of, and yet I go in the hall and I'd listen to them recite the dialogue from sitcom. I know they only saw once because I saw it too, and they remembered it correctly. And I'm like, what is that about TV that it just put it in their brain and stayed there and I can't do in the classroom? So when I went to the university that fall, I thought I was going to learn how to use television in the classroom to be a better teacher. But after the first semester, I found those mass comm students were having a whole lot more fun than I was. And I just went, there's a thing they say at CBN University. It's not called Regent University, but they would say it's God's master plan for life. You're planning your life. And I just went, I think my master plan just changed. And I moved completely into the mass comms, and I had a ball. The school was very small then. It was about 1,200 students when I started, and you knew everybody, you knew all the faculty, and it was a very nurturing, supportive environment. And I just dove into everything. And I was taking TV classes, and I was taking communication theory classes, and I was taking theater classes. I almost didn't have a major because I kept messing around and just having fun doing everything. And then I finally changed my stuff enough. So I'm technically a mass comm major with a communication studies and drama cognitive. I had a double cognitive. And I came out of school thinking, and I was in that program, was introduced to, they did a weekly news magazine called News Site that I wasn't even really aware that they did. And the professor who was really the executive producer of that show I was the communication dean's graduate assistant, so I had a little office, and he came down to my office one day and he said, hey, some folks told me that you look pretty good on camera in your production course, and I need an anchor for my show this weekend because my anchor's on vacation. And I'm going, okay, I've never seen this show. And he goes, oh, it's easy. There's a teleprompter. You just read what's in front of you. And I went, okay. I'd never seen the show. It wasn't in news. I was just like, and I show up for this thing and people are running around. They're going, here, mark your scripts. And I'm going, why? With what am I supposed to be marking? And the anchor, the main anchor who had just come back from Beirut, where he'd done this big, it was his thesis. And he was doing all this stuff. He goes, it's mostly going to be me, but just do this, mark it this way, you know. So I'm getting on. It was a live to tape show that aired actually nationally, probably at 3 a.m., but it did air nationally. And I was terrified. I'm thinking this cannot look good. I was just so lost the whole time. And so it was like, okay, I did that. And then on Monday, that professor came back down to my office and he said, hey, look, I want you to be the anchor on News Site. And I went, I sucked. This is bad. And he was going, no. He goes, you'll get it. And so I learned news backwards because usually people, you know, they learn to write, then you do packages, you learn to report, and then you get to be an anchor. So I was the dumb anchor who probably got on because I looked good and had to then learn the journalism backwards. It didn't make me popular, but it was a really good experience. And there was something about it that I loved doing, and it gave me a great resume. And so 9 months after I graduated, I got my first TV job in Champaign, Illinois, being the weekend reporter and weeknight reporter. And after 4 months, I was the weekend anchor and weekday reporter. And then I learned to produce the show. And I learned to produce special project stuff. I did everything there. I edited my shows. I edited my special projects. I edited all my reporting. I didn't shoot. And to this day, I'm a terrible shooter, which is unfortunate, but I'm a pretty good editor. And I won awards there. And I went to Norfolk and did the same. And then went to WRAL in Raleigh and spent 8 years there with you. And learned some more things. And
covering education, which you came out of.
After Champaign, I specialized in covering education. And so 18 of the 20 years I was a reporter, I covered education. And I'm frustrated with education in general for our country because I feel like United States will not pay for prevention. They will not pay for prevention, even if prevention is proven to be cheaper in the long run. The statistic I always like to quote is, there is a correlation between the prison population and their ability to read. There's a high correlation and probably some causation. Other than an alien invasion, what would just force us to get together and do the right thing? I think about that in the whole racial divide that we're struggling with right now, and that, I'm a child that probably benefited the most from the civil rights movement, that I had access to good education. I had, I was probably an affirmative action hire in my first job, but I made darn well sure that any job I got after that was not based on my race, but on my performance. But you do have to give people chances. So I was a benefactor of civil rights. And I thought through my 20s and a good part of my 30s that we were coming along as a nation, and we were gonna get to the point to where race wouldn't matter so much, and then I feel like 2016 ripped off the ugly bandage that made it permissible to to profess racism as an acceptable form that came out from that election, and that people then became very open and very in your face about the things that divide us racially, and we're not very far along. And it was just underground. Now I knew a lot of it was underground because I lived in Georgia, and I saw, actually, oddly enough, in Georgia, it wasn't all that underground, because if people didn't like you, they just told you. And they actually told you in the nicest way most of the time. Just kind of, blew my mind that people would go, oh yeah, I'll work with you, fine, don't come to my house. Don't come to my house. And it's like, yes, ma'am, won't come to your house. But it was, at least you knew what you were dealing with. And I feel like today, at least we know what we're dealing with, but how are we going to deal?
On behalf of the problem, on behalf of the problem, old Southern straight white guy, there's a lot of shaming, Like, I never held any slaves, but there's a lot of, it's your problem. It was your people. It's up to you to fix it. You know, you just need to own it. And I think it immediately generates all this defensiveness.
I know, but I can't tell you, Stuart, how exhausting it is to keep having to explain stuff like this, though, to people who, you know, it's not like I want my white friends to feel bad, but there is this certain level of acceptance of the way that things are, that you can't ask Black people or Latino people to fix, or Asian people to fix. It isn't our problem to fix. And when people, I've had people go like, well, tell me what to do. And I go like, read a book, watch a documentary. Why are you asking me to teach you how not to be racist? That's what is exhausting.
In what circumstances does that happen?
I had a friend in college, and she still believes this, she's Italian, second or third generation Italian American, and her parents speak Italian in the home. And she told me that the prejudice that I experienced, if I actually experienced it, because she didn't agree that I did, at very best no more than what her family experienced as Italian immigrants coming to the United States, and that the difference is that they pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps and were able to, you know, secure their own economy, and Blacks don't do that. And I just wanted to pull her hair out and think, if you could be me for a day, you would not say that to my face and say that my experience as a Black person in America was somehow not valid. And the implication also being that Black people are lazy. I will never forget that.
How does your experience inform what you do right now, especially in this last year in Portland, Oregon?
I'm willing to talk about it in the newsroom, although not tons. It informs me that in my newsroom, I have much work to do to make it more racially diverse, because there are not enough voices in my newsroom, that there are not enough different voices. I have a largely white staff. Portland is largely white. There are more Hispanics in Portland than African Americans, but I need more staff of both. And we talk about how to say things sometimes, so that we're not triggering people to, but we just produced this documentary called The Fight for the Soul of Portland. When the anchor, who is the reporter producer on this project, got started and was sort of into it, she wanted to map it all out in an outline before she really talked to anyone. And I said, set this aside. This isn't a news special. This is a documentary that's driven by voices. And you have to decide which voice is going to be the emotional driver of this project. And then we have to be willing to ask some really tough questions of a lot of different people. So put your outline away. You haven't talked to enough people to form an outline yet. Go talk to people. Just go talk to people. But make sure you are diverse and make sure you're not shying away from people whose voices you don't agree with. And so in this final piece, she did a really good job. I mean, the premise of the piece is that Portland is at a tipping point to where it's either going to figure out how to become the quirky, fun city that people used to see us as, or are we going to just devolve in our own mess the way President Trump saw the city. There's this one interview where she talks to a Black Lives Matter activist who said, oh, you don't like the graffiti, and I'm paraphrasing here, you don't like the graffiti and the broken windows? Too bad, because that's the only way we've been able to make you see us. And that was a really eye-opening thing for her. And this reporter is going to go back actually and follow that story up with some more depth with that person. Is that really the only way? But, you know, she wouldn't have put that person in this story. She found this Black bar restaurant owner who's had damage from, we started calling protesters, and we've had conversations about whether that's the accurate term, because there are protests, and sometimes when the protests go home, then there's these anarchists, they're just agitators out there. And so you have to make distinctions between them. I don't know if she would have talked to him before. You know, we had to have some conversations like be willing to be uncomfortable and not have an answer for that discomfort for a while. We got to get in the habit of listening. And so there's no pretty bows at the end of that documentary because we don't know what's going to happen to Portland. And I had to make her rewrite that. It's like, we don't know the answer. You just present the questions. And I think sometimes on the, what I do on my morning call and listening to pitches and how reporters want to do stories, it can be just sitting back and waiting and saying, but here's a question. Here's a critical question we need to ask of someone who's in power. And it's this. I think my experiences, I'm getting to be an old girl here, of living in different parts of the country. I've lived all over the place and lived in different cultures, dealing with race in different ways, dealing with class in different ways, dealing just with our regionalism. It's, I think that informs the day-to-day production of what we're doing in news at KATU every day, and it's getting good. The newsroom now is not what it was 3 years ago. It's much better, and I really am proud of that, but there's still so much work to be done. Journalism is more important today than it has been in decades. It's needed, and we can't let people's dissatisfaction with being poked dismantle it. Our job is to poke and question government. We're teaching our newsroom to do that every day, literally, to question government, because that's our job. Not to say, you suck, you suck, you suck. Why are you doing this? Why are you spending this? To what end? But where'd that money go? But all those things that just require critical thinking. And so I really value the education that I've had. I think it has created a lot more critical thinker than I used to be. Not the best, but I'm a lot better, and trying to hire people who can listen to stuff and not just accept the spin, because our viewers and our voters deserve that breakdown from us. It's so important. And I also come away from having, you know, I've lived in the Midwest, I've lived in the South, I've lived in the Mid-Atlantic, I've lived in the Southwest, I've now lived in the Pacific Northwest for the second time doing this. I've lived everywhere, and it's amazing. Our country is amazing that it holds together as a country. It's amazing because we are very, very different. And we have to figure out how to hold on to that. It is unique. And we can't just, we've got to get past our racial divides. We've got to figure out how to actually worry more about a class war than a race war. There are people who are amassing wealth at way too high percentages based on the average worker. I worry about financial disparity collapsing our country more than I worry about racial disparity collapsing our country. And the reason I worry about that more is I think young people are figuring out the racial thing much better than the rest of us. And I think they have it within them to work that out. The economic things they are more a victim of. And so I worry that the United States, we make this assumption that the United States will go on as it is forever because we really have lived in such a heyday of it. But historically, we're an experimental ground here. And, the Roman Empire was once all that and it collapsed. We have to worry about the money thing. I think, that to me is the biggest danger of our country. And while I do live in the nicest house I've ever lived in my entire life, I did grow up learning to live frugally because I said in the beginning, we grew up poor, but I didn't know it because our parents were really good about making sure we had a bike and would just let us explore. Kids wanted to play at our house because we had a forest around us and stuff like that. And we were left to our own creative devices to figure out what fun was. And money wasn't a big part of that. It was about creativity and time. And so as I'm thinking about retirement coming in the next decade, I'm trying to harken back to my youth, to I'm making a lot of decisions about what is essential to be in my environment and getting rid of stuff to live more frugally. But I also think, so what can I do with the creativity of time? Hence, I'm learning to refinish furniture because I always wanted to do that. I reupholstered my dining room chairs. I do all my gardening myself. I paint. I like to paint. I think a lot about what can I do with my hands, which is a legacy of my dad. He built a lot of the house I grew up in, and what can we all create from our minds and our hands to save ourselves. I think that's going to be what we have to do. And if I can get through some latent, now what I think is fear from junior high school and high school days, I've even been thinking that maybe one of the things I ought to do is adopt a Black child. I have a degree in education. I have resources. I have everything. I was going to do this in Raleigh. I don't know if I ever told you that. And I chickened out because our schedules were so crazy. I just thought I'm going to take a kid out of foster care and put him in childcare and still never see this child. And maybe that was just a ruse for my fear. I have been giving this a lot of thought in the last year, that we've all been in our houses in our own environment and not going anywhere else, that sometimes the responsibilities that are before us are obvious.
Well, I wanted to say that I respect, love, and admire you, and I've been a huge Yvonne Simons fan for a long time, and I appreciate your time.
It's good to see you, Stuart, and hope when we're all able to travel and what have you, you come out to Portland.
And I am totally going to take Yvonne up on that. Don't say it unless you mean it. Don't invite me to your house unless you mean it. That's the moral of the story. because I find Portland, Oregon a fascinating place. I have several friends there. Thank you, Yvonne Simons. God bless you.
Man Listening is a production of Unmediated LLC in cooperation with the Queen City Podcast Network and Balto Creative Media. Allison Andrews at Andrews Creative and Rachel Clapp-Miller are developmental producers. Sally Higgins at Higgins & Owens tries to keep us legal. Our music is A Day at the Park by the group Pictures of the Floating World. Your announcer is Catherine Smith. That's me. Please go to our Patreon page. You'll find us at patreon.com. Look for Man Listening, one word, no spaces. We hope you'll join us by becoming a member. A small investment can raise up the conversation. If you want exclusive member merch like a t-shirt, we can arrange that too.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. A personal shout out and a thank you to everyone who has supported Man Listening from the very beginning in whatever way you do. I cannot thank you enough.
Don't forget to support us at Patreon. We believe one voice can change the conversation. Click the subscribe button, and next week you'll hear.
But you've got to dream, and it's okay to dream big. And one thing I had to tell them, it's okay to fail. Failure is all right.
That's next week on Man Listening. Thanks.